His breath ghosted across the sensitive skin at the back of my neck, a phantom touch, before his hands ever made contact. One braced the cool wall beside me, a barrier not for me, but for the world outside our sudden bubble. The other, so impossibly slow and devastatingly certain, began its ascent along my hip. It was an exploration, not a grab, a silent question I was already answering. And when my spine arched, melting back into him, there was no jolt of denial, no instinctive recoil. I didn't flinch. I didn't even think to articulate the word no. Instead, I allowed the full, insistent pressure of his body to meld with mine, silently, utterly. It felt like I had shattered something hours, days, years ago, and now, standing here, I harbored no illusion, no desire to piece it back together. The tiled hallway floor, brutally cold beneath my bare feet, offered a stark contrast to the sudden, ferocious heat that surged through every other part of me. My fingers, almost independently, clenched around the cold, smooth metal handle of the dryer door. That warmth, the phantom memory of heated metal, grounded me, a desperate anchor. The quiet hum of the machine, a low, endless thrum, spun its monotonous rhythm behind me, a benevolent, oblivious witness. It was the only sound brave enough to puncture the profound, suffocating silence we had conjured between us. His weight settled against me, heavy and solid, a demand both patient and ravenous. I could hear his breath, a ragged inhale, a sharp exhale, shifting subtly with every unconscious tightening of my muscles. And I kept tightening, a futile, desperate attempt by my body to trap this fragile, dangerous moment, to never let it slip away. I didn't truly grasp what was unfolding. Not then. Not at first. I had spent so many nights meticulously constructing a life of quiet content, pretending it was enough. Nights spent folding socks into perfect squares, checking lunchboxes for forgotten notes, setting alarms that promised nothing but another indistinguishable day. I had always believed in boundaries, rigid, unmovable lines etched into the fabric of existence. Solid, unwavering things that one either respected or irrevocably crossed. But that, I was beginning to understand, was the comforting lie we told ourselves to maintain a semblance of safety. Real boundaries, I now knew, were blurry things in the dark. They shimmered, wavered, and ultimately dissolved when someone looked at you, really looked, like you were still vibrant and alive beneath the endless piles of laundry, the monotonous grocery lists, the suffocating routines that slowly, meticulously, ate away at the woman you once were. He was younger than me. Not dramatically so, perhaps only by a decade or a little more, but just enough for me to create an internal narrative that insisted the age difference was irrelevant. Just enough for me to whisper lies to myself, insisting this simmering connection was harmless, a flicker of forgotten youth. It was just enough to excuse the way my eyes lingered a second too long when his laughter echoed through the kitchen, or the subtle, frantic shift in my pulse when his arm brushed mine as we reached for the same cupboard. He wasn't a stranger. He was family, or, at least, a variation of it. My husband's cousin, his kid cousin, as my husband still affectionately called him, even though Ethan was nearly 30. No one dared call him a kid when he effortlessly hauled heavy moving boxes up our steep stairs or helped my husband clear the gutters after a violent storm. He often stayed with us on weekends, when his work brought him to town, sleeping quietly in the guest room, eating dinner at our table like any other family member. He moved through our house with the quiet efficiency of a ghost, a presence barely felt, but always there. But I saw the way he looked at me. And, far worse, I saw the way I looked back. It hadn't truly begun in that hallway. That was simply the first time we acknowledged its existence, the first moment we allowed it to breathe. It had started much, much earlier. Perhaps the first time I wore a thin tank top without a bra, foolishly believing no one would notice the subtle shift in my silhouette. Or the first time he said, "You look really nice today," his voice casual, yet weighted with an ambiguity that made my stomach flutter. I couldn't discern if it was a simple compliment or a whispered confession. And instead of dismissing it, pushing it away as I should have, I cradled that ambiguity, carried it like a dangerous secret in my pocket. I was 41, married, 2 children, and a husband who still diligently showed up, still paid the mounting bills, still returned home every single night. But he hadn't truly touched me in weeks, perhaps even months, though I'd stopped counting. I stopped keeping track because I'd convinced myself it would hurt less if I didn't chart the slow, agonizing erosion of our physical intimacy. I wasn't unloved, not precisely, but I was profoundly unnoticed. There was a subtle yet crucial distinction, one that cut just as deep, if not deeper. I wasn't actively looking to cheat, wasn't desperately searching for someone new to fill a void. No, I was searching for something that used to be mine, a forgotten version of myself that had slowly, irrevocably, vanished beneath the crushing weight of motherhood, the compromises of marriage, and the endless necessity of making do. When Ethan looked at me, I didn't feel the familiar weariness that had become my constant companion. I didn't feel the soul-crushing invisibility. Instead, I felt remembered, as if someone had finally held a mirror up to the parts of me I'd long believed I had buried, irrevocably, years ago. That night in the hallway, it wasn't a calculated plan. There was no slow, deliberate build-up. No stolen glances across a crowded room. No nervous smiles exchanged in hushed tones right before. Just the quiet intimacy of proximity, the low hum of the dryer, and the intimate, almost unbearable sound of his breath behind me. I hadn't even heard him approach. 1 second, I was standing there, mindlessly refolding shirts I'd already folded, a meaningless chore. The next, he was simply there, warm, solid, dangerously close. His hand hovered just above my hip for a fractional moment, a silent, unspoken question. And I didn't utter the word yes, but I certainly didn't utter no either. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned back, ever so subtly, a millimeter, perhaps 2. And that was enough. It was everything. I told myself it was a catastrophic mistake, a moment of profound weakness. I convinced myself that guilt, heavy and suffocating, would flood in the instant it was over, drowning me whole. But when it ended, when I straightened my slightly rumpled shirt and walked away, the only thing I felt was a profound, almost unsettling quiet. Not peace, not absolution, certainly not shame in the way I'd anticipated. Just a deep, resonant silence that echoed inside me, louder and more insistent than any apology or confession ever could. He didn't speak. He didn't pursue me down the hallway, didn't ask if I was all right. He simply remained there, still and silent, a statue forged from all the forbidden things we had just said without a single word. The next morning, I performed the ritual of making coffee, just as always. Measured out the scoops with practiced ease, stirred the sugar into my husband's mug, waited, almost unconsciously, for some cosmic shift that never arrived. My husband sat at the kitchen island, engrossed in his tablet. Same posture, same habitual scrolling between headlines, same casual, indifferent silence, as if everything in our universe was precisely as it should be. Because for him it was. I was still the woman who remembered to fill his prescription and bought the specific almond creamer he favored. Still the woman who remembered his mother's birthday and gently reminded him to call. Still the woman who hadn't initiated anything physical in almost an entire year. And he never, not once, asked why. But for me, everything had shifted on its axis. The hallway burned in my memory, a vivid, unwelcome cinematic loop. A scene from a movie I'd never intended to audition for. The startling warmth of his breath on my neck. The unexpected weight of hands that had never held me before, yet felt like they had been waiting, patiently, for years. It played on loop in the dark theater of my mind. I found myself wanting to rewind, not to undo what had happened, but to relive it, to savor each forbidden second. And that terrified me more than anything. Because the brutal truth wasn't that I had made a mistake. The truth was far more insidious, far more dangerous. I had wanted it. I had chosen it. And once you admit that kind of searing want, it doesn't let go so easily. The familiar scent of fabric softener had always been a comforting anchor, a tangible reminder of control, of routine, of safety, of the endless, predictable rhythm of domestic life. But that morning, as I stood in the laundry room, feigning interest in folding towels that didn't need folding, I realized I was using it like a fragile shield. The scent wrapped itself around me like a flimsy armor, but it couldn't quiet the alien heat still pulsing, insistent and alive, between my ribs. It had been just one night, one fleeting moment. And yet, I couldn't banish the image of the dryer door, the faint flicker of light against its metallic surface. I remembered the trembling in my legs afterward, how I hadn't dared to look back. But he had. I could still feel it in the air behind me, even now. That silent, charged waiting. That dangerous stillness. My husband left for work at precisely 8:17, exactly as he did every single weekday. He pressed a perfunctory kiss to the top of my head, a ritual he'd observed daily for 12 years. Uttered the same words, "Be back by 6." Tossed his keys into the same ceramic bowl by the door. The front door clicked shut with a definitive, final sound. I didn't move. I remained frozen, a statue of domestic duty, until I heard the distant rumble of his car pulling out of the driveway, fading into the morning traffic. Only then did I turn, slowly, and look down the silent hallway. The guest room door was cracked. Just a sliver. Not enough to be considered truly open, but just enough to let me know he was awake. Just enough to make me wonder if he was waiting. I didn't walk towards it, but I didn't walk away either. I stood there, my hand still resting on the cool countertop, pretending to scrub at a spot that didn't exist, pretending I hadn't just waited, with bated breath, for that exact sound. The car engine fading into the morning quiet. Only then could I truly breathe again. The day stretched out, fragmented and slow, dissolving into a series of disconnected tasks. Coffee, dishes, obligatory phone calls, errands. But I couldn't shake the memory. Not the act itself, though that haunted me in its own way, a visceral ghost. No, it was the way I had felt when it happened. Like I was finally, profoundly, being seen. Like I had shed my old, suffocating skin and stepped back into a version of myself I had meticulously buried beneath layers of duty and schedules. And that, more than any potential fallout, scared me to my core. Because it wasn't about Ethan. Not truly. It was about what I became when he looked at me like that. That afternoon, I offered to drive to pick up groceries. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I often ran errands alone while my husband worked and the children were at school. But this time, Ethan offered to come with me. Just to help with the bags, he'd said, his voice casual. Make it easier on your back. I rationalized it, told myself it was practical, harmless, efficient. And perhaps, if I had simply said no, perhaps everything would have stopped there. But I didn't. I simply said sure. And he grabbed his jacket without another word, his movements fluid and unhurried. We didn't speak much in the car. A few superficial jokes about traffic, a comment about the unseasonable weather. Normal, inconsequential things. But the silence between those normal things was heavier, thicker than it should have been. It sat between us, a tangible presence, like a breath being held endlessly. I pulled into a spot under a sprawling tree at the far edge of the store parking lot. Reached for my purse, trying to ignore the almost imperceptible tremor in my hand. When I turned the key to shut the engine off, nothing happened. I frowned, turned it again. Still nothing. Must have left the lights on. I murmured, not really to him, more to the dense air filling the small space. The battery had drained. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't ask for help, and he didn't suggest it either. He simply sat there, quiet, his gaze fixed on the windshield. Raindrops began to gather on the glass, soft at first, like tentative whispers, then heavier, turning into tiny, glistening rivers that sliced through the gathering fog. I stared at them, trying to lose myself in their hypnotic descent, trying to pull myself back into something simple and still. But then he spoke. I didn't sleep last night. I didn't turn to look at him, just listened, every nerve ending alert. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't entirely sure he should say more. I kept thinking you'd come back, he added, the words a fragile whisper. That was the first time I felt the breath truly catch in my throat, a sudden, fierce tightness, a flicker of something undeniable, raw. I turned slightly, my eyes still fixed rigidly forward. Did you want me to? I asked, my voice sounding thin, alien even to my own ears. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, fraught with unspoken meaning. Then he finally spoke again. You keep pretending that night was a mistake, and I didn't let him finish. I snapped, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the rain-soaked quiet. Don't, I said, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if we were hurtling forward, even though we were utterly motionless. He apologized immediately, his voice softening, a ripple of regret in the air. I'm sorry. I don't know how to act like nothing happened. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat profound. I do, I replied, the words thick with years of unspoken resignation. I've been doing it for years. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, laden, almost overflowing, as if we had cracked something vital open between us, and neither of us dared to look too closely at what lay inside. I should have started the engine again, made the call for help, asked him to get out of the car. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching the relentless rain, feeling it all begin again. I hadn't meant for it to happen again. But the truth was, I hadn't done a single thing to stop it. That's what they don't tell you about affairs. It's not always some cinematic betrayal, smeared with lipstick on collars and tangled bed sheets. Sometimes, it's just slow, silent, a creeping series of almosts that inexorably turn into inevitables. A hand brushing yours when passing the salt. A look that lingers 1 second too long across a crowded room. A door that stays open just wide enough to tempt, to beckon. Over the next few days, he barely touched me, barely spoke of what had transpired. But the tension never dissipated. It hovered in the charged spaces between us, a tangible entity. In the quiet sound of his footsteps descending the stairs. In the way his eyes would inevitably find mine when I stretched to reach something on a high shelf, my shirt lifting just enough to expose a sliver of skin. I felt it in every pause, every shared glance, every single breath. And then came the text. Just one. A photo. It was the laundry room. Empty. Sunlight spilling in from the hallway. The dryer door ajar. A familiar jar, placed on the machine's surface. He didn't write anything. He didn't need to. The image spoke volumes. I stared at that picture for a solid 5 minutes, my thumb hovering, before finally deleting it. Then I cried. Not because I felt the crushing weight of guilt. Not then. I cried because I missed it. I missed being seen, truly seen. Missed being desired, remembered. That was the real betrayal. Not of my husband, not of the vows I had taken years ago, but of the carefully constructed version of myself who had once believed I could remain numb forever and still be whole. The woman who thought she could survive invisibility if she just stayed busy enough, if she just kept moving. The woman who mistook the absence of harm for happiness. But I wasn't happy. I was fading. And he saw it. I started sleeping with the bedroom door shut. Not locked, just closed. It felt like the only barrier, however flimsy, that I could still control. Every night, I pulled the covers to my chin, closed my eyes beside a man who still wore his wedding ring, still brought home groceries on Thursdays, an anchor of predictable routine. And I wondered how many women were living like this, quiet, waiting for something they couldn't name, pretending that absence didn't feel like betrayal when it lasted long enough to hollow you out. I hadn't spoken to Ethan in days. Not with words, not even a deliberate glance. But his presence lingered in the house, pervasive as a perfume I couldn't scrub from the air. Every now and then, I would catch the faint scent of his shampoo in the guest bathroom, or hear his low laugh echo faintly from the living room when the TV was on, just loud enough to carry. It was always there, underneath everything. That thrum, that pulse, insistent and deep, like a bruise just beginning to bloom, radiating a quiet ache. One night, I passed him in the hallway again. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He simply walked past, close enough for our arms to almost brush, a breath away from contact. And my body, without conscious thought, leaned toward him. I hated that. Hated the part of me that moved without permission, without logic, without my mind's consent. This wasn't seduction anymore. It was a profound, involuntary surrender. Slow, quiet, inexorable. When he finally touched me again, it didn't feel new. It felt like a memory we were both stepping into, a dance we had rehearsed in countless silent moments. I was supposed to be stripping the guest bed. He'd left that morning after breakfast, saying he had errands to run. No return time specified, so I allowed myself to breathe, to move without caution for once. I peeled back the sheets, stacked the pillows neatly, my fingers lingering over the spot where his shoulders had pressed into the mattress the night before. It still smelled like him. Clean, masculine, a scent that had become familiar in a way that should have felt dangerous, but instead offered a deceptive sense of safety. That's when I heard the front door unlock. I froze, my hands still clutching the corner of the fitted sheet, arrested mid-task. I didn't turn. I listened. His footsteps were slow, measured, casual, as if he wasn't surprised to find me there, as if he had expected it. When I finally turned, He was standing in the doorway, watching me. Not smug, not sheepish, just acutely, dangerously aware. "Forgot my charger," he said, his voice low. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He stepped inside, closing the door almost, but not quite behind him. A sliver of hallway light remained, a thin, persistent warning. A silent witness. We didn't speak for a long moment, the air thick with unsaid things, charged with an unspoken understanding. And then he stepped closer. His hand grazed my waist, a feather-light touch that nonetheless ignited a wildfire. I should have pulled away, should have stepped forward, put distance between us. Instead, I leaned into the bed, my palms pressing flat against the mattress like a silent, desperate confession. I said something then. I barely recognized my own voice, a raw, fragile sound. "If you're going to do this, don't stop this time." He didn't reply with words. He simply listened to my body. The faint rasp of his jeans against my sweats, the hushed whisper of cotton on cotton, the heavy stillness of breath catching, then held, in my chest. He pressed into me, not rough, not rushed, but with the kind of absolute certainty that declared we had crossed this line long ago, that this wasn't new, that we were only now catching up to what had already happened inside us, a truth long acknowledged by our bodies. I clenched the sheets, the rough fabric digging into my palms, felt the unmistakable trembling in my thighs before I felt his hands grip harder, pulling me back against him, as if he instinctively knew precisely how far he could push before I truly broke. This wasn't a moment of fleeting curiosity. This wasn't about base lust. It was about raw, primal need, and suffocating shame, and a ravenous hunger, all tangled, inextricably, into one devastating knot. When he leaned over me, he didn't kiss. He didn't whisper empty words. He just stayed impossibly close, his breath warm against my ear. That nearness, that profound intimacy, cracked something open inside me, a part one thought had gone irrevocably numb years ago. I bit down on my lip until I tasted the metallic tang of copper, but the sound still escaped my throat. That soft, aching sound of being touched, like I mattered. When it was over, we didn't speak. He zipped his jeans, adjusted his clothes, and walked out without a backward glance. I stayed there, hands still pressed to the mattress, my legs shaking uncontrollably, the hallway still partially lit by that accusing sliver of light. I stared at the spot where I had braced myself, the sheets still warm from his body. Later, I found myself in the laundry room again. I sat on the closed lid of the washing machine, knees drawn tight to my chest, clutching a shirt that wasn't mine. His. A plain gray t-shirt. He must have forgotten it. Or perhaps he had left it there on purpose. I didn't know. I hadn't moved it, just kept holding it, bringing it to my nose, inhaling its clean, masculine scent. Days had passed. Days since the guest bed. Days since I had let him take me without a flicker of hesitation. Days since I had stopped pretending. I had fully expected to be consumed by guilt, by an overwhelming wave of shame. I anticipated the desperate urge to scrub myself clean with every scalding bath, to cry and scream until my throat was raw, to question my very sanity. But instead, I felt cracked open. Not broken, not shattered, but utterly exposed. As if someone had finally pried open a door I had meticulously nailed shut years ago, and now the air rushing in was too sharp, too fresh, too vital. I couldn't close it again, even if I wanted to. I hadn't told anyone. Not a friend, not my sister, not even myself, not in full, coherent sentences. Because how do you confess something you chose with your whole body, with every pulsing vein and aching muscle, when your mind was still frantically whispering, "Stop"? He was younger, not a child, but young enough to make me feel as if I had deliberately stepped into something I should have cautiously walked around. And yet, I hadn't been tricked. I hadn't been seduced against my will. I had walked straight into it, eyes wide open. That night, I folded towels, just to have something, anything, to do with my restless hands. I started and restarted the dryer twice, just for the low, comforting drone, for the illusion of movement, of purpose. But the noise didn't silence anything. Not really, because he came back. Again, later than usual. Alone. "Forgot something," he said again, his voice flat. This time, I didn't ask what. We stood in the kitchen, the air between us thick, heavy with unspoken things. Words came in pieces, broken fragments. He asked if I regretted it. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't. Not in the way I was supposed to. I regretted what it meant. I regretted the inherent danger, the lies, the inevitable fallout. But not the touch. Not the feeling of being desperately needed, profoundly wanted. I hadn't felt that in so long. It scared me how quickly I had let it in, how easily I would offer myself again, if only he asked. That was the most terrifying part of all. It wasn't the secrecy. It wasn't the immense risk. It was how terrifyingly alive I felt when he was near. We didn't speak again for a while after that. Not truly. We were careful, deliberately, almost painstakingly so, like two people circling a dangerous flame, pretending we couldn't already smell the acrid smoke in our hair. He stopped staying over on weekends. Stopped lingering in the kitchen after dinner. But he still came around. Still showed up to help with groceries. Still nodded politely across the dinner table, as if we weren't both acutely aware of what it felt like to be inside each other less than a week ago. And every time our shoulders brushed in the hallway, or we reached for the same drawer in the kitchen, or passed too close in the narrow pantry, I felt it all again. Like a match being struck in the suffocating dark. Fast. Hot. Dangerous. We texted only once after the second time. He sent another picture. The laundry room again. Same muted light. Same stark emptiness. No words. No emojis. Just an image. Like a dare. Like a memory, waiting to be touched again. I stared at it for so long, my phone dimmed itself twice. Then I deleted it. Then I cried. Because deleting it didn't erase what I felt. It only served to prove how deeply it had already sunk its roots. I tried to create distance. Stayed out longer when I ran errands. Kept the bedroom door closed, even when no one else was home. Made myself busy, folding clothes I didn't care about, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean. But he was always there. In the silent walls, in the charged air, in the lingering scent of fabric softener that didn't belong to my husband, and in the way my body betrayed me every single time I heard his voice. One night, he passed behind me in the hallway again. This time, he didn't even touch me. But the mere heat of him, just an inch away, stirred something inside me that I no longer knew how to suppress. And when he finally did touch me again, it didn't feel like temptation. It felt like completion. The house was quiet. Not just empty, but a padded silence, the kind that feels thick, heavy with unspoken anticipation. I was supposed to be changing the sheets again. He'd said he had errands, offered no specific time for his return. And I believed him. Or perhaps, I simply didn't care. I walked into the guest room, my movements imbued with the quiet solemnity of a ritual. Peeled back the bedding as if I were handling something sacred, something profoundly precious. My fingers traced the corner of the mattress where his shoulders had pressed the night before. Still warm. Still faintly scented. Like him. And then the front door clicked open. I should have moved. I should have panicked, fled, or screamed. But I didn't. I stayed there, hands on the mattress, frozen, waiting. I heard the faint creak of the door frame, his quiet, measured steps. Then he was behind me again. "Is this where you pretend it didn't happen?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, a warm breath against my ear. His hand rested lightly on my waist, a feather-light touch, yet potent. I should have said no. I should have moved forward, away from him. But instead, I leaned back, my palms pressing flat against the mattress, my back arched, my neck exposed, vulnerable. I surrendered again. Not to him, not truly, but to myself. His breath at the nape of my neck, one hand firm, possessive, on my hip, the other trailing slowly, deliberately, up under my shirt. A movement so exquisitely controlled, it felt like a question I had already answered 1,000 times over. I whispered something. I don't even remember the words. Maybe "don't stop." Maybe just his name. Maybe nothing at all. My knees braced instinctively. And then he pressed into me again. Slow. Full. Devastating. I felt everything. His weight, his rhythm, the frantic pulse of guilt being drowned out, slowly but surely, by something louder, something primal, something needful and unrelenting. The kind of connection that doesn't ask for permission because it already knows the answer. I bit down hard on my lip, but the sound escaped anyway. That soft gasp, a raw, involuntary sound ripped from deep within me. It was a hunger-drenched admission, laced with shame, as he leaned over me. Not to speak comforting words, not to trace the lines of my face with a gentle touch, but simply to exist, to cover me with the sheer weight and warmth of his body. It felt like he was a human shield, capable of absorbing the furious trembling from my very bones, quieting the chaotic vibration that had taken hold. I surrendered then. I let go of everything that had held me tethered, the creeping tendrils of fear, the simmering embers of anger, the gnawing, persistent ache that had become my constant companion. In that singular, breathless crash, it all collapsed, a dam breaking under an unbearable pressure. When he finally pulled back, a tangible absence where his body had been, I remained bent over the bed. My hands were flat against the rumpled sheets, my chest heaving, air tearing in and out of my lungs. Behind me, the soft, almost imperceptible whisper of his zipper closing was a stark, mundane punctuation mark to the explosive intimacy we had just shared. No words were exchanged, only the ragged rhythm of our breathing, uneven and heavy, echoing the unspeakable act. The hallway light still spilled in, a faint, accusing sliver from the door that never quite shut, a silent witness to our transgression. "I shouldn't have come in," he said, his voice a low rumble, thick with a regret I suspected was only half true. "Yeah," I whispered back, my voice hoarse, barely audible. "But I didn't tell you to leave." He hesitated, a palpable tension in the air. I could almost hear the battle raging within him. "I wanted to," he began, then softer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I also wanted to do that again." For long moments, I could only nod, a barely perceptible tremor in my head, still unable to face him. I stayed exactly where I was, refusing to turn around, the shame and exhilaration a dizzying cocktail in my veins. He walked out quiet, controlled, his departure a stark contrast to the hurricane that still raged within me. I remained on the edge of the bed, my fingers still tingling with the phantom imprint of his skin, my legs trembling uncontrollably beneath me. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crushing weight of emptiness that usually resided in my core felt lighter. Not entirely gone, not completely filled, but undeniably less. Yet, the subsequent silence was not a balm, it was worse. The need, far from diminishing, had multiplied, amplified, turning every casual glance, every shared breath into a potential landmine. That weekend, my husband took the kids to visit his parents, 2 towns over. I stayed behind, feigning illness, a polite excuse I offered with an ease that startled me. And it was true, in a way. I was sick, just not the kind of sick they could ever imagine. The kind that made me stop eating, stopped me from sleeping. I just existed, a ghost in my own home, haunted by echoes of his touch, flashes of memory, the persistent weight of his hands still imprinted on my skin, a phantom pressure that refused to fade. A few days later, Ethan came by, a flimsy pretext of dropping something off. He maintained a facade of casual friendliness, a mastery of normalcy that made my stomach clench. We didn't touch, didn't even brush shoulders in the narrow confines of the hallway, but I could smell him. The familiar scent of his cologne, a primal trigger that bypassed all logic. I hated how badly I wanted him to touch me again, to press into me in that wordless intimacy, to make me feel wanted enough to finally forget everything else, my life, my responsibilities, my very identity. That's when the worst realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't trying to stop anymore. I had clung to the naive hope that if I simply starved the desire, if I refused to feed it, it would eventually wither and die. But it hadn't. It had simply gone quieter, more insidious, like grief, like a deep-seated longing. It was the kind of ache that never raised its voice in protest, but never truly left the room either, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. I still saw him, in fleeting flashes, in passing at family dinners where the air buzzed with the unspoken history between us. He was a master of decorum, smiling when he was supposed to, laughing at the appropriate moments. But then he would look at me, truly look, and in those moments, I felt utterly exposed, as if I were standing naked in a bustling crowd. I couldn't decide if I wanted to run and hide from that raw vulnerability or beg him to keep looking, to strip away all my layers until there was nothing left but this essential, raw self. My husband didn't suspect anything, not out loud, at least. He still asked if I needed help with the kids' homework, a mundane gesture that now felt impossibly distant. He still handed me the remote during movie nights, still kissed my cheek when I brought him his coffee in the mornings. But something was shifting, slowly, subtly, like a tectonic plate grinding beneath our carefully constructed life. It was as if he could feel something tugging at the edges of our existence, a fraying thread he couldn't quite name. One night, he looked up from his tablet, his eyes lingering on me a second too long, as if a question formed on his lips, but he didn't trust the answer he might receive. I smiled too hard, too fast, a transparent shield, and he looked away, the moment passing, yet leaving a lingering chill. Ethan hadn't come by in over a week. I told myself it was good, that the distance was a balm, a necessary healing. But every time I walked past the laundry room, every time I caught a faint whiff of his cologne on a coat he'd left behind, something deep inside me stirred. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was something closer to grief, a profound sense of loss for something I shouldn't have wanted, shouldn't have had. I checked my phone far more often than was healthy, my thumb hovering over the screen. 2 texts from him sat there, unread, then read, then reread until the words blurred. The first, asterisk still thinking about it. Asterisk the second, a few days later, a brutal honesty. Asterisk I didn't come back because I don't trust myself, not because I don't want to. Asterisk I didn't respond. I didn't delete them either, these digital ghosts, silent witnesses to a desire that refused to die. It wasn't supposed to last. Affairs never are. They're built on borrowed time, designed to eventually collapse in a spectacular implosion of drama or discovery. But mine didn't end with a bang. It faded, slowly, insidiously, like a scar on the soul. Always there, a testament to what had been, but softer with time, less raw. Or perhaps, I just got better at hiding it. From him. From myself. One morning, I found myself standing in the hallway, in the exact spot where he first touched me. I ran my hand along the cool plaster, tracing the memory, remembering the crushing weight of it all, my hand bracing against the wall, his breath on my neck, the agonizing pause just before the fall. I whispered into the silence, the words barely audible, even to myself. I don't know if I want to stop, or if I just want to stop hating myself for not stopping. I didn't know which answer was worse. Then came the moment I hadn't prepared for, the casual remark that shattered my carefully constructed calm. My husband asked, almost absently, over breakfast, his eyes still fixated on his tablet, shielded from my gaze. Did Ethan say why he stopped coming around? My stomach dropped, a cold, sickening lurch. I stirred my coffee too hard, the spoon clattering against the mug, an anxious rhythm. I forced my voice to remain steady, an act of sheer will. Said he's busy. Work's picking up. He nodded, a brief, dismissive gesture. He didn't press, didn't even look up. But that was the moment I realized the profound, terrifying truth. I could lie to him, effortlessly, convincingly. Something fundamental had shifted within me, in a way I couldn't undo, even if I wanted to. I had become the kind of woman who could answer calmly, composed, with a raging storm beneath her skin. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, their breaths soft, and even in their beds, after the dishes were stacked, gleaming under the kitchen light, and the world outside had finally gone quiet, I found myself back in the hallway again. The exact same stretch of cool tile, the same soft, hesitant flicker of the laundry room light casting long shadows. I stepped precisely where he had stood, closed my eyes, and felt something cold ripple through me, a chilling realization of my own complicity. I wanted to blame him, wanted to pin it all on him, to absolve myself of responsibility, but I couldn't. The truth was stark, undeniable. I let him in. Every single time. Even now, even in his absence, I still left the door open in my mind, a perpetual invitation to the memory of him. I went to church the next morning, not out of habit, not seeking absolution or forgiveness. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I just needed to sit somewhere quiet, somewhere still, somewhere the walls didn't remember the phantom press of his hands, the weight of his body. The pew was cold beneath me, the place mostly empty, just a few scattered souls, each carrying their own invisible shame, their own silent burdens. I folded my hands in my lap, not in prayer, not to ask for forgiveness, not to plead to be saved. I just sat there, and I let it ache. Because for the first time, I didn't want to erase it. I just wanted to understand it. The days went on, just as they always had. School lunches were packed, grocery lists meticulously made, small talk exchanged at dinner, birthdays celebrated, errands run, PTA meetings attended. The world didn't stop to accommodate my guilt. It didn't expose me or swallow me whole. It simply kept turning, and I kept turning with it, pretending I didn't notice how the walls of our home seemed to whisper more loudly in the quiet, full of secrets I couldn't acknowledge. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. I stopped replaying the scene in the hallway in my head, a film loop of regret and yearning. But I never stopped remembering. Sometimes, remembering isn't something you choose to do. It chooses you. It waits, insidious, in the silence between sentences, in the quiet spaces of daily life. It hides behind the practiced smile you give your husband when he says something kind, a cruel twist of irony. It clings to the mundane sounds of fabric folding in the laundry room, or footsteps echoing through an empty hallway. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friend, because there's a certain kind of truth that doesn't belong in daylight. It doesn't survive translation into the crude, reductive language of labels like affair or cheating. Those words were too simplistic, too easy, too utterly inadequate for what this truly was. It wasn't just about lust or the fleeting thrill of forbidden sex. It was about the feeling of being wanted, truly wanted, in a profound way I hadn't experienced in years. It was about being seen, truly seen, in a house where I had slowly, imperceptibly, started to vanish into the backdrop of domesticity. It was about hearing my name, not out of habit, but out of a genuine, urgent need. That kind of attention, that profound recognition, doesn't come often in a lifetime. And when it does, you either run from it in fear, or you let it in. I let it in. But letting it in meant letting something else out. Something I'd kept tucked away for years behind the roles of motherhood and marriage, behind polite smiles and dutiful acceptance. I let out the loneliness that had settled deep in my bones, the unacknowledged anger, the pervasive emptiness I hadn't realized had grown such deep, sprawling roots. And once it surfaced, a torrent unleashed, I couldn't shove it back in. It had irrevocably changed the shape of me, altered my very essence. Ethan didn't come back. Not really. He texted once, weeks later, a simple query. Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk, I stared at the words on the screen for a long, agonizing time. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to articulate the messy, complicated truth. Asterisk, no, but I will be. My husband still kissed me on the cheek, a familiar, absent-minded gesture. He still rubbed my back distractedly when I stood too long at the sink, lost in thought. He still fell asleep before me most nights, never noticing that I stared at the ceiling for an hour or more, counting regrets like sheep, each one a sharp prick in the quiet dark. I didn't confess, not because I wasn't sorry, but because confession wouldn't cleanse me. It would only transfer the immense weight of my secret onto him, and I chose to carry it myself, quietly, constantly. Some secrets don't scream for release. They whisper. They whisper in the moments you almost forget, then resurface with chilling clarity. They whisper in the way you flinch when someone touches you kindly, an innocent touch now tainted. They whisper in the way you avoid your own reflection, not because of what you did, but because of how much you truly wanted it, how desperately you craved it. I live with that now, not as a punishment, not as a penance, but more like a scar. Something I touch from time to time, a faint ridge beneath my skin, just to remind myself it's real. That I was real. That I was real, because for a long time, lost in the humdrum, I had stopped feeling like I was. The pain is quieter now, muted by the passage of time, but it never truly leaves. It lingers in the background of good days, a persistent shadow. It sharpens, unexpectedly, around forgotten anniversaries, dates unmarked by anyone but my own subconscious. It hums, a low, constant vibration, when the house is utterly still, and I catch a fleeting glimpse of myself in the laundry room mirror. The same room where it all started. The same place I became someone else for a night. Or perhaps, just became more of who I already was, stripped bare of all pretenses. If I could go back, to that moment, to that hallway, I honestly don't know what I would change. Maybe I'd find the strength to say no. Maybe I'd stop him before his hands found my waist, before his breath ghosted over my skin. Maybe I'd firmly close the guest room door, shutting out the possibility. Maybe I'd walk away the very first time I saw that hungry, knowing look in his eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd still let it happen. Just once. Just to know what it felt like to be wanted like that again. Perhaps once was all it ever needed to be. Perhaps once was all it ever should have been. I still make coffee every morning, the familiar aroma of comfort. I still kiss my kids on the forehead, still tuck them into bed with soft words and tighter hugs, holding them close in the dim light. I still fold towels in the laundry room, even when they don't strictly need folding, the rhythmic motion a silent meditation. I still exist in the same rhythms, the same routines. But I am not the same. Not entirely. And I'm not sure I ever will be again. That's the insidious thing about infidelity. No one talks about it. It doesn't always explode in a spectacular burst of drama and destruction. Sometimes it just lingers. Soft, steady, like a persistent hum underneath everything else. You keep moving. You keep loving. You keep living. But there's a version of you that only exists in that secret, in that sacred, shameful space. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world sleeps, you miss her. Even if you hate her,